Okay, so we're holding firm there at participants, so we'll just get started and then hopefully some more join us as we go on.
Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Mann. I am the sponsorship specialist for the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's Navigating COVID-19 webinar with Mark Safe. Mark Safe is a new initiative that exists to provide customer, employee, and community confidence in workplace health and safety practices. In this COVID-19 pandemic, Mark Safe is working to provide a turnkey solution for business owners to open their doors again with an operational plan and continue to improve their business safety solutions. The province announced last week that most businesses are ordered to close and are allowed to reopen on June 5th. We're so pleased to get back to business, but June 5th is this Friday, leaving many businesses feeling a bit overwhelmed. Mark Safe is joining us today to walk us through the quickest way to safely get your business back up and running. The most important thing moving forward will be the health and safety of your staff and your customers. This is your chance to ask specific questions about how to adhere to the new public health guidelines and get back to your operations. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it below in the Q&A box. And if you're commenting in the chat box, I would encourage you to address your message to panelists and all attendees so everyone can see the post as it may be to interest to all. There is also the option to address your message to all panelists, which only Matt and I will see. I'd like to introduce our presenter now. So Matt Symes is the CEO of Symplicity Design. Over the last 10 years, he has helped more than 350 organizations improve, innovate, and grow. At Symplicity, Matt is responsible for the same growth journey. Not only can he speak from having helped others grow their business, but he can speak candidly about trials and tribulations of growing Symplicity Designs along the way. Matt completed a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Education from the University of New Brunswick and his master's at Wilfrid Laurier University. He's currently on leave from his PhD studies as he grows Symplicity Designs. So thanks so much for joining us today, Matt, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. You know, I think that there's no room here in this conversation for a bunch of blither blather. There's some real stuff going on here that's scary when it comes to opening. And I'll just tell you that we opened United Sign and Trimline. So for those who don't know, we have a small equity portfolio. Among that is United Sign and Trimline. United Sign and Trimline made signs. As COVID-19 hit, there was no need for signs. We pivoted to face shields. As we made the face shields, we realized that, you know, the public story was, look at this company. They've been able to pivot and make face shields for the front line. But the story behind the scenes was the one that really started to enthrall me. Went, holy geez. It cost us about $130,000 to learn the lessons of how to safely reopen United Sign and Trimline and to get people back there. And there was no information on how to do this. It was, you know, the World Health Organization had some ideas. We're still learning on studies. It's quite an intimidating time as a business owner to figure out what is safe and what isn't. And, you know, stopping the spread of a contagion is not something that any one of us who started businesses thought we were going to have to contend with. So, you know, it's with that experience and with the experience of helping many others, because safety is table stakes, right? Like, it's got to be a safe place. Before you start improving, innovating, and growing a business, I got to be able to run it safely. And so we said, how are we going to help other businesses get the safety piece done so they can contend with the business challenge? That was the most important bit. So that's what we're going to walk through here today. This is a long-winded bunch of words that you have over because you're going to have this slide deck. The reason for this is, folks, we've lived in safety. We've lived in safety with DuPont. We've lived in safety with Amira. We lived in safety with some of the best safety organizations in the world. We've learned from some of the best. We're trying to distill that $130,000 of expense down to something that's very reasonable for you to get at. Starting with a free 2-page document that you have fully that you can get from us, because my God, this is hard. So Carrie Jenix is the COO of Mark Safe, and she is not here today because she's literally fielding tons of calls Can't make this stuff up. Tons of restaurants right now trying to figure out how do they reopen? How do they do spacing requirements? Do they need barriers? What do they need? What kind of signage do you need? That's what we're going to walk through here today. Folks, no question, if you've been listening on the virus, you know this. We've gone from the hammer and we're moving into the dance. So the hammer is that time period where everybody said, stay home. We got that shelter in place. Don't go out. You know, we got the wonderful t-shirts, Stay the Blazes Home. I got one of them, makes me smile. You've got all that. But now we're into a period where the government cannot afford for us to stay home, nor can the economy afford for us to stay home for the next 2 years while we find a vaccine. Some people are saying 9 months. Some people are saying 2 years. It doesn't matter. Whatever period that is, where we live with the threat of the contagion spreading, is going to be called the dance. The dance is when we move back and forth between cycles of easing and tightening of cycles of easing and tightening of social distancing protocols, physical distancing protocols, what businesses can be open, which ones can't. Because here's the thing, the Maritimes, and I believe that most of the people on here are from the Maritimes have done a fantastic job of flattening the curve. They've done a fantastic job of getting us down into where we can be the dance. So that has allowed healthcare to get ready. They got the right amount of equipment. They have ventilators. They now have access to PPE that they didn't have access to. We did our job to flatten the curve. It doesn't mean the risk of the virus has gone away. And here's what's going to happen. As we open up, as we start to open borders up, as we start to open the economy up, we're going to invite it back into our lives. And this is the dance that everybody has to contend with, everybody from government to business owners. So through that, how do we get through this 2 years of dancing? That's a quick quote from Bill Gates. He's the one that says optimistically 9 months, very likely 2 years. And remember that once you get a vaccine, you still have to get it to everybody. So to get a vaccine, then you have to get it to everybody. In this environment, folks, certainty is impossible. Navigating risk is the new norm. Now, you navigate risk every day, okay? We could stop all deaths from people who get into cars and get into accidents. We could stop all automobile accident deaths. We'd all have to drive armadillos. We'd all have to drive tanks, but we could stop them all. So I say that because you navigate risk today, you just don't think about it necessarily in that way. So I got to start to think about how am I going to navigate this new risk? I don't know for you, but I thought I knew how to wash my hands until that guy on the YouTube video showed me with gloves and paint that I had no idea how to wash my hands. So, you know, it took me apparently long enough to learn that. There are new things that we're learning to navigate. There are new habits. I don't know how you come in and out of your house. I know that I come in and out of my house and I wash my hands every time I come in and out. That wasn't something I did before. So we're having to learn how to navigate this new risk. And it's a good thing, by the way. So the spread of contagions, which could be the flu, could be anything, forget COVID for a second, was a $25 billion problem in the US economy last year. That's not including the secondary and tertiary impacts of people staying home, healthcare costs, just on businesses alone. So some of the things you're putting in place are not just for COVID, they're actually so that you reduce sick time, you reduce the spread of contagions in your place. But you've got to figure out how to get your hand around what does that mean for you. So to get started, I mentioned the free guide. There's a 2-pager on this. It's going to take you through the 5 functional components of it. So let's talk about the 3 principles first, because we're all principle based. And this is don't bring it, don't catch it, don't spread it. That's the game right now. That's when we back out, when we think about this, it's don't bring it, don't catch it, don't spread it. Okay? Who is this for? Basically for everybody. But if you look at this slide, you can see very clearly that there are certain groups of people who are at greater risk than other groups. Certain groups like dentists, certain groups like registered nurses are at a greater risk for catching this than, say, perhaps you look at the blue over there, lawyers, for example, or for us. Like, I mean, I haven't been out of my house all that much, right? Like, I have less chance of contracting the virus than others. So where are you on this? Now, don't just think about your direct job. Think about the people you interact with and their jobs, because it doesn't spread just in a workplace. It spreads from people to people, right? So this is important to think about. 91% of businesses do not have a JOSH committee, Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee. Now, if you're under 20, there was no requirement for it. And quite frankly, what was safety before? I know what safety was for me before. Safety for Symplicity at Symplicity Designs before was this. Did you change your tires to winter tires, because we drive a lot, and watch out for paper cuts? Like, that was the extent of safety. Now, we got a whole new level that we need to contend with. So there's two things that are going to go on here. Number one, this is a huge exercise in leading change. And here's the problem with leading change. You have to change core behaviors of how you interact. That's tough. Those are deeply ingrained habit loops of how you interact in the workplace. And guess what? Just because people have been out of the workplace for 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, whatever it happens to be for you, what's going to happen as soon as they enter the workplace? There's a trigger as they go into the workplace, and they're going to be into the old habit loop right away unless you dislodge it, unless you change it. And we've seen this all over the place. People come back and they're headed back the way they normally do. They're on autopilot, and you got to jar them out of that. So it's a huge leading change exercise around the 5 functional areas. So let's talk about, there's a leading change curve here, but let's talk about the 5 areas. Number 1, workflow and hotspots. We were talking to a certain government organization, and they told us about their plan for the workplace. And then we showed them this diagram, and it's like a light bulb went off. They went, oh, damn, people move. Yes, people move around. Folks, think about the flow of your work. Think about the flow of your work from the supplier to how you do your work to the customer interaction. Think about all the movement that goes on there. You want to take a look at the movement so that you can find all of the hot spots. We were talking with one restaurant owner, and they said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mitigate this by only having bar service. Probably about the worst thing you can do, because you're making everybody come to one area and move from one area constantly. Didn't think of it that way, because they're not thinking, and most people aren't thinking in flow. So think about the workflow and the hotspots. So and folks, storage lockers, bathroom doors, the front door. How are you managing to understand the flow of work and where people are going to pass each other? Because the very first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure I don't have too many places where people congregate. That's what I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get so that I can maneuver and do my job while respecting physical distancing. That's the best way to ensure we don't spread the contagion. Now, that's not possible in every situation, so that's where we go to the next part of this, which is how do I make sure that I have the right triggers when I'm doing about workflow and hotspots? How do I make sure I have the right triggers? And you can notice the decals. We'll talk about signage in a bit, but there is no question in my mind that you're going to need to pay attention to the signage that you have so that it nudges the right flow. Do some of your hallways become one way? Do some of your staircases become single person staircases? Have you thought about that? Most people have thought about the desk. They haven't thought about the movement within their day, right? So the other thing that I would say, folks, is let's just make sure that you don't bring everybody back to the office on day 1. In fact, you probably aren't going to want to have everybody in the office at all times. There's a reason why extremely wealthy families don't fly together. Can't have one plane go down. So folks, when you're thinking about your whole workforce, you probably can't have everybody in there. I know at United, we moved to 2 shifts. We moved to 2 shifts for 2 reasons. Number 1, we couldn't have the whole place go down. Number 2, we had a little bit of a rush order on face shields, but we still kept 2 shifts for quite some time because you wanted the separation. You don't want all your people there at the same time. Because if one person gets it, think about your business being shut down. As soon as one person gets it, what do the others around them have to now do? Self-quarantine for 14 days. Can you have everybody in your business self-quarantine for 14 days and still function? Some of you can, because they can be at home working, and maybe they didn't get in there at home working. But, you know, worst case scenario in this, how are you going to manage that? How are you going to manage that? Okay. Number 2, PPE improper hygiene. So when I talk about PPE improper hygiene, you can see a hygiene station here. This is at United. But you can see, how are you teaching people to clean their hands and making it clear that as you move between areas? The reason United costs so much money to do is there's a manufacturing part of this, there's an office part of this, and there's a customer area to this. And to make it worse, in the manufacturer area, suppliers drop stuff off. So it was just like, it was like one business, but it had all the problems of every business in it. So proper hygiene for that place meant as you move between areas, you now needed to set up hygiene stations so that people could wash their hands. You'll notice that when I talk about PPE, I don't talk about gloves that often. And that's because gloves end up being something that carries it with you if you're not careful. You're actually far better off to learn hand washing, regular hand washing, than gloves. Gloves actually carry, it's an interesting thing that I've learned so far, but again, it seems everything that you learn, you have to relearn. And here's why I talk about PPE. What do we think of when we think of PPE? We think of gloves, we think of masks, we think of shields in some way. We think maybe of gowns, depending on what you're doing, and we think of all of the hand sanitizer, etc., that you might need. So, masks. Folks, I'm not afraid to say that at the beginning of this thing, I laughed at masks. I thought they were ridiculous. I thought they did nothing. And even the World Health Organization confirmed that they don't do anything. They won't stop the spread of this. And then the World Health Organization changed their tune on it. And when they did, they changed their tune because they realized that though a mask won't stop me from getting it, if you wear a mask and I wear a mask, we won't spread it to each other. And the stat that blew me away is if 60% of the population wears masks that are 60% effective, you basically eliminate the spread of the pandemic. Think about that for a second. If you want the backup on this, it's Thomas Puyo. He's got a wonderful blog. He's the one to talk about the hammer and the dance. He's got a peer-reviewed study. And if you want a place where they did this, a country where they did this, the Czech Republic did it and basically managed this virus in a totally different way than most of their fellow European neighbors, in a much more effective way. So, you know, somebody put it this way, about the kindest thing you can do in public these days is to wear a mask, because it doesn't protect you, but it protects someone else. And so when you can't ensure physical distancing, when you can't ensure that 6 feet, and 6 feet's a lot, try like when you can't ensure 6 feet, what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you can't ensure that? And it's got to come down to some form of PPE. So you got the masks, and then if you're in close contact with people, if you're a hairdresser, if you're a massage therapist, if you're a physiotherapist, all those, you're going to want to strongly consider shields. Shields do 2 things. Number 1, they give you an added layer of protection. They don't replace the mask. You got to put them on still. The shields give you an added layer of protection. Most importantly, ironically, not only do they stop the spray, but they stop you from touching your face. Depending on what study you look at, you touch your own face somewhere between 300 and 3,000 times a day. Just as I say that, a lot of people are probably trying to avoid touching their face. I know I am right now, right? Like this is something that we aren't even conscious of until we are. And so that's why a face shield is so important in close contact situations. So a good mask and a good shield, very important in close contact situations. The kitchen of a restaurant is likely going to have to get into masks of some sort, because I don't know some of those kitchens. I've been in them. They're very small. So if you can't avoid the 6 feet, now you have an added responsibility around PPE. Folks, if you have customers coming in and you have a boardroom and you're going to meet in a boardroom with your customers, my guess is you're going to need in some way, shape, or form to offer them a mask and have one yourself. Now, all it needs to be is non-medical grade, 3-ply, The masks are costing somewhere between $1.20 and $1.40 online. You can get them in boxes of 50. It's never a bad thing to have one of those around. Again, PPE, when you can't get physical distancing, so number one is how do I ensure workflow and hotspots and create the opportunity for physical distancing? Number two, when I can't, I go to PPE and proper hygiene. Okay. Number three, training. Folks, notice on there it says only one person on the stairwell at a time. How are you creating the training manual and how are you creating this for your people? I'm going to give you a little hint here. Do it with your people, not to your people. So don't come in and hand them a stack of this is the new way you need to act. Come in with the guidelines. So if you're in Nova Scotia, which I think most of you are because this is with the Halifax Chamber, if you're in Nova Scotia, the thing is every association has given out slightly different set of guidelines. So you then have to take those guidelines and you have to create a COVID-19 operational plan. So you got to take the guidelines, create a plan. Okay. That plan then needs to be executed. I only execute that plan when behaviors change. How do you get buy-in to something? How do you lead change with that? You build that plan and the new behaviors with the people who need to do it. This won't take that long. This won't take that long. My guess is somewhere between 2 and 8 hours over the course of 1 to 2 days, you're going to figure out what is the new standard operating procedures, what are the new training, what do I have to do to train people? What are those standard operating procedures, right? Number three, so training people on the new behaviors. One person on the stairs instead of two. Clean your hands when you go between areas. These are all things. How are you going to treat the washroom? What's the wipe down procedure? I mean, all these things that we never had to think about. And they're exhausting, folks. They're exhausting. You know, and most of us want to get back to doing productive work. And now we're stuck figuring out how we have to transition between parts of our business. We used to just fly through, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're moving fast. Okay, number four. And I talked about this earlier in number one, and now I'm going to move to number four, signage. Folks, if I need new behaviors, I now need to nudge people to remind them. So how are you going to get the right signage? In New Brunswick, there are 4 signs that are mandatory. In Nova Scotia, it depends on your business. But the idea that you need to respect physical distancing, that you need to ensure that people are wearing the proper PPE, that you need to ensure you wash your hands, and what are your expectations of people? What are your expectations of people, right? And folks, some of these signs, what's the purpose of the sign? The purpose of the sign is not to be this wonderfully branded thing that sort of molds into the wall and I don't see it. The purpose of the sign is to stop me and make me think. Right? Why do you think every time that they put a new red light in somewhere, they put a stop bit way before the red light and they say, 2 months before, they say, hey, we're going to put a red light here. And they start to get you conditioned. So they put a sign to start to condition you. And even after that red light comes in, they still have that sign for a while. Signs are an extremely important part of conditioning. Now, folks, you heard me talk about a sign company. I own a sign company, and I'm telling you, buy the cheapest version of the signs. We have cheap versions available on MarkSafe because you don't know what you need yet. You know you need signs, but don't buy nice signs yet. Buy minimal viable signs, and then once you know where they need to go, work with someone to buy good signs. The first bit is print them, post them, then go. And Kathleen's got one here. If we share an office space, including washrooms and hallways with other businesses, how do we ensure all are following the health protocols? It's a great question, Kathleen. And the reality is, how do you ensure everybody follows the law? You really need social agreement that you're going to. And the real question I'm going to ask you is, what happens if the person you're sharing that office space with in another business doesn't agree to the same level of due diligence that you do? That's where the conflict's going to come in. But the very first thing that I would do in your situation where you have to contend with different people in the same building is I would be having a meeting of the minds to go, what are you doing from these perspectives? What's your minimum? Because it's all going to come down to what's your minimum standard. The minimum standard, you're going to have to determine, do I agree with it or not? I was talking to a sales professional and they go into about 80 different locations. What they've determined is they're going to find out what protocols the individual's following, and if they're not following the minimum ones that they want, they're going to meet outside with them. They're not going to meet inside with them. As long as they're following the minimum or more, they're going to go in and either adhere to the minimum or adhere to whatever level they're going to. I mean, this is forcing conversations, and uncomfortable ones. I mean, fortunately, we're not as politicized as the US around this, where wearing or not wearing a mask has become some sort of political badge. But the problem is it's still going to come down to some lines that are going to be uncomfortable. So this is going to force you to have uncomfortable conversations. And the way that I would want to have them is up front. Today, in the next week, as we reopen the business, now's the time to get in touch with the people you share buildings with and go, hey, we're all reopening, we're getting there. What are you thinking around these things? Right? And that's why we're trying to get this 2-page guide so you can have a conversation around, what are you thinking about workflow and hotspots? What are you thinking about Ppe Improper Hygiene? Where are you? And hopefully between a series of really authentic and good questions, you are more aligned than not. And if you are, then hopefully you can create the training programs that allows you to treat those shared spaces properly and up to the standard that you have. Then I can get the signage, which nudges the right behavior. And the final bit, folks, is communication. If you've sort of gone to sleep at the wheel here, which sometimes people can do through these presentations, please come back to me for this one point. How are you communicating to your customers the new normal? How are you communicating? Because I know that there are now 2 locations in Halifax that I dearly love that I am not returning to until either they reach out and show me a new way in which they're going to operate, or we have a vaccine. Because I walked into these places during this wonderful outbreak, and what they were doing there alarmed me. In one area, there was a person wearing a mask down around here, and the other 2 weren't wearing masks. And it was strange the way they were operating. They had some of the protections in, but not other ones. And I didn't know how to show up. I didn't know what to do when I got there. We're all confused. We're all confused about how to behave. And so if I'm going to show up, think about your best customers. How do they come see you? If you have a meeting schedule, or if you have an email list, this is the chance to send it out and say, folks, we're really excited to reopen. Here's the conditions by which we're going to have visitors. And we look forward to having you under these conditions. Then I, as a customer, can decide if I agree with the way you're opening and I can come. Folks, China, this next statement may or may not excite you. China right now is basically back up to about 90% capacity of the economy, but it's not equal. Service is only up to about 40 to 50% of the pre-COVID economy, which scares me because 80% of the Canadian economy is service. So we're back up to 90%, or we're back up to 50%. Okay, I want you to think about your business with 50% sales. Can it survive? Can it even survive with 90% of sales? Most small and micro businesses that I work with, if they're running a 10% margin, they're probably not reaching out to us. And very few are running a 10% EBITDA. So coming back online at 90% of pre-COVID levels won't be enough to save those businesses. The ones that I think are going to win are the ones that are able to over-communicate to both their clients and their colleagues to make them feel safe. Like I'm exhausted by thinking about which restaurant. I would love to go to a restaurant. You know, home cooked meals are great. We've had them now for 10, 11 weeks. I've eaten out twice. Once I was very disappointed and won't be going back to that place. Another time I have no idea because it was delivery and it showed up and the delivery guy was great. Okay. A restaurant, I don't want to go through the work. I really don't. I want the restaurant to email me and say what they're doing. I want them to put on Facebook what they're doing. I want them to tell me what they're doing to keep me safe. Then I'll go. I'm exhausted by trying to figure that out. I don't want it. If you own a business where a customer's coming to you, the onus is on you to communicate with that customer how you're going to receive them. The onus isn't on them to figure it out. It's on you to set the standard and you to communicate, which is this last part. Communicate, over communicate. All of your social platforms should say, we're so excited to reopen and here are the conditions we're going to reopen under. Right? So that's the fifth component. And people miss this one altogether. They miss number 1 and 5. They're off buying masks, buying shields, and buying barriers, and they're forgetting about workflow and hotspots and how to communicate to customers and colleagues. Okay, folks, I hope that you learn from our cost. It cost us $130,000 because we had to learn a lot of lessons. You don't have to. You don't have to, right? These are the offerings we have. We have the free 2-page guide. We have the do-it-yourself. I think it's $300 and some odd, and basically it's this thick, and it will ask you a whole bunch of questions, and your COVID-19 plan will be basically done. And then we have the options where we can do it with you, because what we realized is we can't get to helping organizations until they can get to open safely. So then we went, oh crap. Okay, we got to get down and get in and figure this out. And we had to figure it out for our own businesses, so we want to share it. We want to share it. So it's 1:32. I answered Kathleen's questions. I want to open it up to questions. There are only 28 of you on here. What other questions might you have? Thanks, Chris.
So we'll wait for any questions to come through, and we do encourage that as well, as Matt said. So I do have a couple of questions that we prepared for you, Matt.
Yeah.
Do you have suggestions for ways to communicate to customers and clients where you strongly focus on that? Is it social media? How would you suggest reaching out to those clients?
Yeah, I think you got to use your email list and even phone them depending on what kind of business you are, right? So if, we all know we have our top 10 to 25% of clients. How do you communicate with those clients? Make sure that you're communicating and getting a hold of them and over communicating, because you need them to be your tribe coming back online. But then beyond that, make sure your message is consistent, so that if I want to find you on Facebook, I see the same message on Facebook that I do on LinkedIn, that I do on Instagram. I would have that wide open, because it's confusing right now, Chris. You guys have reopened at the chamber, and I'm sure you're starting to run into some of this stuff, because it's just confusing to figure out how to interact with each other and with customers.
Do you want me to read that out for you, Matt, or are you just reading it?
No, this is very interesting and thought-provoking. Thank you. Where do we find the free guide? So the free guide, marksafe.ca, it's sitting there. We'll also send it out to you after this presentation. In this whole slide deck will go to you as well. And you're absolutely right, Susan. Number 1 and number 5 are totally forgotten, and then you run into it. They're totally forgotten. Yep, and you can access it right now, Rob. If you go into marksafe.ca, you can download it right away, or it'll come out in this. Like I said, we wanted to make sure you could actually get your hands around these 5 functional points and get moving, because nothing's more frustrating to a business owner than not being able to open right now. Yeah, okay. You talked about your costs over $100,000. What is a typical business looking at in this new reality? Kent, can you tell me what kind of business? Because ours was super expensive because of the complexity of it. Yours probably doesn't have to be. Just trying to talk about what kind of business with me. So let me just drone on a bit then on that one to say what kind of business. So if you're a restaurant, you probably have some spacing issues you need to. So there's a bit of reconfiguring your room, which is probably just a bit of labor cost to move your tables around. There's some reconfiguring of where the sanitizer is going to be and some PPE concerns. Small restaurant, there you go. Small restaurant or service business. So small restaurant has concerns in the kitchen. They're probably not going to be able to avoid one another. And so you're going to have to figure out what the PPE requirements are. You're also going to have to figure out, the guide that went out for the restaurant said, highly recommend reservations. They're not forcing it, but highly recommend it. So how are you going to manage crowd control? So there's going to be a whole bunch of physical distancing issues you need to think about coming in. My guess is you're going to run into somewhere between $2,000 and $10,000 of total expense to get up and going again, by the time you include labor and the PPE you're going to need, and a bit of training time. Okay, so I have a 2-bedroom accommodation with shared bathroom and common area with breakfast included. Would you suggest that I only accommodate one family bubble at a time? You're asking for a recommendation there, so I'll give it to you. Yes, I think you already know it by the way you're asking it. One of the things I've seen in restaurants is when they have 2 sinks side by side, they're closing down one of the sinks in a bathroom. And they're only allowing one in the bathroom at a time. That's one of the things they're looking at. So these are things that you gotta give some consideration to. Lindsay, I've been reading about a pre-return to work and daily self-assessment checklist. Do you have any thoughts about these and/or what the standard should be? Yeah, what is that new habit loop? So I know that one of our designers is piloting one of our personal habit loops right now. And that is, she's got hand sanitizer in the car so that as soon as she opens the door and gets in, the first thing she does is just a reminder to squirt, sanitize the wheel, get moving. That's her habit loop to recognize. So every time she opens and closes the door, it's there, right? I 100% think you're going to need new habit loops, and I would encourage you to talk with your colleagues around how to develop a best practice there. Right? I mean, the other thing that I didn't mention in this, and I'm glad most people are still here, Chris, is you need a logbook. If you're going to have people come to you, you have to have a logbook. I mean, think about what happened in Campbellton with that doctor. Forget your opinions on whether the doctor should have or not. The fact that they were able to trace everybody he saw is the only saving grace. There was the hairstylist in Missouri who saw 91 people. Thank God that they knew all 91 people and could get a hold of them. So folks, the last thing on earth you want is to have people come to your location and then find out someone came, may have exposed someone, and you can't get a hold of people. That's going to be the one piece of due diligence that you're going to get nailed for if you don't have it in most places, right? So if you're going to have outside visitors, what's the logbook?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Matt, because a lot of times too is the symptoms don't show itself for almost 2 weeks, right?
That's exactly
so for
it.
2 weeks, you think you're fine and everything's good, and then all of a sudden you get hit. Then you got to think back for 2 weeks. What did I do? Where did I go? Who did I talk to? So alone, from a business point, that's a really good idea. I like that. One question we had was surrounding like small businesses that are worried about affording, sanitization, the PPE, all those kind of things. What are some options for them? I mean, I know you mentioned with Signage, go as cheap as you can right now.
Yeah.
For the sanitization, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends on if you're talking about outside or just people. Like if you run a small service company and you don't have that many visitors from outside, folks, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Soap and water is fine to clean your hands. It's probably the most effective. It's more effective than the alcohol after a while that just dries the heck out of your hands. Right, so soap and water is great for that. That's fairly cheap. The other thing is the 3-ply masks are about $1.20 a piece. So they're not expensive. Plus, if you encourage your employees or even provide your employees with cloth masks that they watch out for the cloth masks because they have to wash them, right? So this is something that I highly recommend that you figure out. It all starts with your workflow, because your workflow will dictate what level of protection you need. Right, so just get your building outlay and just go, where do people go? Where are the hot spots? What are the concerns? This will only take you about an hour. You could sketch it out on a piece of paper. Just make sure that you take a look at the hot spots and then go, what do I actually need? What do I need? And then when you think you've got it, talk to your colleagues, because part of this is a whole fear thing of getting it over. And if they're part of creating the plan, they're going to own the plan. So what do they feel comfortable in, right? So the best thing you can do is be informed, bring some best practices, and involve them in the discussion. Then it doesn't have to cost $100,000. It can be done a lot cheaper, It can be done for $1,000 probably by the time you're all said and done. Okay, when speaking of tracking, how do you recommend retail businesses to track names and a logbook at the front desk? So a lot of security companies will have this. A lot of people who do ISO will have this. A logbook as people are coming in, logbook. And folks, you know, if I'm running a retail, I'm probably looking at, do I have any opportunity to transition to reservation? Now I know who's coming in. I've got a captive audience. It's amazing. Susan, you're not going to be surprised. When we tried to get the turnkey, I've got 250,000 3-ply masks sitting. They're $1.20 a piece, $50 things. They're on the MarkSafe website. But that's the best because I couldn't find them. So I had to bring them in. I wanted to make them easy to go. But any sort of Guardian starting to hold them. There's some other places that are starting to have them, but they're there. They're available, but they're hard to find. And make sure, folks, you don't overbuy here. Most of you don't need medical grade. Don't buy medical grade. The people who do need medical grade need them. Get the non-ones. Like there's no, if you're in service, if you're in restaurant, if you're in retail, there's almost no need for medical grade. People are doing waxing require it, but aside from that, nobody else really. So,
and just reverting back to your point about the logbook, I think a lot of people would be a little bit more open to signing something like that or giving their information nowadays. And it shows that the retailer is being safe to say, if anything were to happen, at least we can get back in touch with you. So I think people will be open to that suggestion. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and Lindsay, you're absolutely right. I mean, ideally, the logbook does not have a shared pen. That just makes it worse. Ideally, you've got someone controlling that, right? And folks, make it part of your introduction. Great retail service has a good introduction anyway. Hey, nice to see you. Thanks for coming in. You know, what brings you here today? You know that we've got this new thing on COVID. Can I make sure to capture your name, etc.? We just want to be able to contact you if anything happens.
Yeah, we went to a nursery this weekend, my wife and I, to buy a couple of some flowers, potted plants. But anyways, we had someone meet us right at the gate and, you know, introduce themselves, say, you know, this is the protocol. There's a few other people ahead of you. We have to wait for them to leave. Then when you enter, please follow the arrows and then you'll see them here. Like, it was very clear and transparent what you need to do while you're in there. And everyone, like from a social distancing standpoint, it was perfect because everyone knew exactly what to expect as soon as they went in. It was clear, it was identified. And I find that a lot of places where that's not done, it's a free-for-all. People don't follow the rules or the instructions kind of thing, right? So
yeah, and people are looking for that guidance. They want that because it's too it's too much thinking. When I come to your place, I want to look at your goods. I don't want to think if I'm safe. And if you show me you've taken care of my safety, now I free up my brain to what I might want to buy or take with me, right?
Absolutely. So one last question from our end, as long as there's not any coming in, but for larger organizations, I know your 5-step plan, like a factory or warehouse, where it's harder to implement some of those things. Where should those organizations start, Matt, do you think?
Well, they need to start with a very robust version of step 1.
Okay.
Because step 1 will tell you the flow from how goods come in to how they're processed to how they go out. And you really can't see the potential spread of a contagion until you can see the workflow. Because where does it flow? It flows from person to person. So it flows with their movement. And that's what people are forgetting about this. It's not a, you know, you can't do anything at the beginning of the entrance or there's a lot of things you can do in this world to prevent a lot of injuries and a lot of things. This one, it flows with people. And so you need to know how people flow in your business. And especially, I've seen a lot of people just do it for their shop, but then they don't realize that their suppliers come, right? Like one of the things you noticed, I'll go back here just very quickly. That's how we deal with our suppliers at United is there's a gate. And what does that do? Do you think that we want to put a great big place? Hey, you're in the jail cell. No, but well, what are we doing? We're physically stopping you and forcing you to either wash your hands or drop your parcel. It's because we know that we'll forget. So we created an environment where you can't forget. Right? So that's some of the things you need to do in the bigger areas, but it all starts with step 1 of understanding workflow. Okay. If a business worked for you to get MarkSafe certified, what would turnaround time look like? It's very quick, Lindsay. Right now, we do have some openings. It depends which one you choose. So the do-it-yourself gets to you right away. And if we work with you, it'll be likely we have spots here in the next couple of weeks. We've freed up our calendar for this. But it all depends on the complexity of your business, right? That's the thing.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we don't have any other questions coming through. Matt, just before we close off, is there anything else that you want to state?
Folks, we're all trying to figure this out. And it's confusing. And it's somewhat scary, especially if you are close to someone who's vulnerable on this, or if you have high anxiety yourself. And so what are you doing to get yourself in a place where you're ready to lead this? And then what are you doing to help everybody around you feel okay about navigating the dance? Because we all need the economy to get back up and going in some way. So Chris, it's not important to me that you call me and engage MarkSafe. It's important to me that you figure out how to get to a level of safety so that we can get to another level in the economy, because we all need to start making revenue again in a positive way.
Right. Great. Well, Matt, this has been great. So thanks so much. We really appreciate it. And you're by far my favorite facilitator, that you do the Q&A yourself. It's unbelievable. I just sit here. I'm just clicking buttons and not doing anything. So it's great. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sandra.
So thank you again, Matt, and we really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining us. So we're hosting more webinars every week with experts in mindfulness, content strategy, and change management. So head to halifaxchamber.com/events for a full lineup. The webinar was recorded and will be available for all attendees shortly on our YouTube page. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great week, everyone. Take care.